All right, thank you, sir. So let's go ahead and get started here. So we've got a couple items to cover. We'll put this on record for folks who are following along remotely. So welcome to Grooming. This is our last Grooming before Thanksgiving break for those of us here in the U.S. We've got three items to cover, namely some developer documentation here. So Mr. Kalkoman is going to cover that in number 477. We've got a news story from James on some instrumentation to help out with testing on that one, so 515. And then last but not least, which I think will carry us for a bit, some discovery work on account details. And so for those who were here last week, we did some early work on ratings, and we did some early work on wish list for after our MVP, after our 2.3 release, to really start thinking about what that authenticated experience looks like. And so anxious to get through that and really get some feedback and some initial sizing ahead of the UX work there. So as always, thank you everybody for attending, and let's go ahead and get started. So let's look at number 477 here. James, I'll let you walk through that if you want to share your screen, or I'm happy to share mine as well if you want me to drive either way.
I don't really have anything to share, just some thoughts. Can you hear me, Eric?
I can, yep.
Yep. Okay. So I think we kind of talked about this last week with, what's the simplest thing we can have people make, and the usual is a hello world kind of project, and I think the simplest thing we could ask them to do is a hello world React component, like something that will print out hello world as its function. And the second step to that would be to actually integrate that into Venya somehow. Put that somewhere in Venya, and after that, the next task we would ask them to do is implement a CSS module to give that component style, and then refactor it. So it uses prompts like setting the text size and color. And this would just be like a beginner's kind of tutorial, right? Because these are pretty simple, basic stuff that most developers would already know or are able to pick up pretty easily.
Yep.
And then
good exposure into build and how things are done, right? So if you're a React developer, you should be able to do this pretty quickly, but you'll at least learn how the studio build team, the build system and such work. So I think that makes a lot of sense.
Right. It's just to get them used to the cycle, the dev cycle, the dev processes of, creating a component and integrating into running PWA without worrying about setting PWA up or anything. Since we already have Venya, we can use that.
Yep.
Another thing that a beginning topic would be integrate Peregrine component into their own component. I know we have price and lists, which are pretty simple. That can be easily integrated, I would think. And then creating a storybook test would be another thing we could have do as a tutorial.
Yep.
And we have documentation already, but make it part of that tutorial of beginning for a beginner.
Yep. Yeah, and that'd be a good thing to link to as well. So that makes sense. No, Mr. Kalkoman, on these, I'm looking through this, and you've got some good suggestions on content here between Hello World, CSS module, and such. Are these ones you'd like to note in here, or you just want to are you kind of putting them out there for discussion to see if there's see if that's valuable? Because those would be great things to add here if we feel like they are.
Both, to see what people think about that approach.
Yep.
Do you think that's a good way of introducing development process with the PWA Studio, or anything I need to add? And this is just for beginners, so I mean there's some more advanced stuff that we can add later, but just to get people started and comfortable with developing with these tools.
Got it. Makes sense.
So are there any thoughts or suggestions on topics that we can add to these tutorials?
I think they're great, but I'm a bit biased, so I'm already starting to capture these. So yeah.
I feel like there's so many, and it would take me some time to think about what should be top level and how to group them. if there's anything that I think is basic and kind of missing, it's how to use Venia, Peregrine, and BuildPack as NPM dependencies rather than through what so far has been our developer use case, which is to clone the PWA Studio repository itself.
Yeah.
So I'd say how to use them as Venia dependencies. And working with the cloud, I actually worked a lot to get us there just so that they didn't have to download that whole repo and spend an hour and a half installing 200 modules.
Yep. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I mean, I think when we looked at this and we can expand it, we thought about what those tasks might be after configuration and setup. But I think it seems like there might be a build component, if I understand correctly, that might be helpful there once that's done, right? And so
Yes.
What about a tutorial for writing jest tests with Venia components?
That's a good idea.
yeah,
That's a good idea.
Also, like a set of guidelines for like what should be tested and whatnot.
Yeah, I mean,
good idea.
what should be tested is, I
Good
think that we
question.
have added enough to say, please test as much as you can. What maybe we need to add is the various strategies for performing particular types of tests. Like you use enzyme for React components and, jest for everything else, and enzyme ingest. And you use matchers under certain circumstances. I mean, a lot of it is just learning to do JS testing, but I think we might also, like presently we have mostly unit tests, and I think it might be a good idea to start encouraging people to add integration and scenario tests, which test at the level, which you'd store those tests in the Venia base directory at the level, and they would refer to workflows.
Yep. Makes sense. Yeah, I like the jest part of that quite a bit. Excellent. Anything else? Any?
I was just gonna say that going forward, we'll probably break this apart into separate issues instead of working off this one large issue.
Yep. Yeah, I think this becomes an epic. I think you're right.
Yeah.
So we can
But yeah, I mean, if anyone else has any suggestions, feel free to add comments to this issue so we can, add it on to the list.
Right. Yeah, this is probably too big to groom or estimate what we currently have here, and so I'll hold back from that one. So I think what we can do then eventually is just when we break these down into smaller stories, look at maybe 1 to 3 point types of stories that fall into that as we get through that. And so that's probably the next step of that. There's happy to do it here live, but nobody wants to sit here and watch me type for that one. So I'll break these out, and James, I'll probably Kalkman, lean on you to help a little bit with some of the preliminary estimates. And these then become actually, in the spirit of identifying things that are help needed for the community. I think those end up being really good candidates, especially for those who've been a little bit more involved with some of these as well. So let's look at that offline.
Okay.
I think that'll be good. Cool. Anything else before we wrap this one up?
None for me.
All right, we got ourselves an epic. Thank you, everybody.
Yay!
All right, let's switch gears here. So, Mr. Zetlin, I can stop using first names. We just confuse each other with so many Jameses and Andrews at this point. So let's take a look at what you've got here. I don't know if you'd like to share yourself and kind of make some modifications. If you'd like me to do so, I'm happy either way.
Oh no, it's as it should be. If we
Okay.
need to, then I'll go ahead and edit myself, and you can refresh or whatever.
Sure.
Sharing my screen, I don't know. I'm like on the Wi-Fi in a little room. I'm worried. And the lighting is
No
terrible.
worries.
I mean, when these things are for meetings, I feel like backlighting you, everyone just looks like a ghoul. It's the worst. I'm not vain. I'm just concerned about reading facial expressions. Okay, now that that's out of the way. We need to add some instrumenting, that is code that meta-analyzes other code at runtime, to Venia and Peregrine, and to our React components and framework in general, so that end-to-end testing is possible. Most of the time with client-side applications, I think everyone who has worked in any scenario where your QA automation team wants to automate a test against a single page app, it is very frustrating for them because they don't know how to know when the page is loaded. All of their frameworks and systems are designed for web pages and then navigating between web pages, and they're all rendered server side. They have made the adjustment to like using the DOM content loaded event, although they don't actually subscribe to it. They just check for whether it has occurred in a polling loop. That's the limitation of WebDriver and indeed almost every other thing that I've seen. Actually, I think every other thing that I've seen. Communicating with headless browsers is the problem. So our MFTF team and nearly everyone we've talked to, and everything I can see online, Protractor, WebDriver IO, Nightwatch.js, you name it, they all have trouble detecting when a React component tree has reached a certain state. And this is especially a problem for progressive web apps because they very deliberately load in chunks. So the page load event takes place long before perhaps the rest of the functionality has come in. The cart may still be loading functionality. As a drawer opens, it may be placing an external call, and React is continuously rendering and re-rendering its components. So it's a difficult question to answer, but we need to find some answer where the React tree exposes something about its internal state to the global context. And I know this is possible because the React developer tools do it. So I would say examine the code in React developer tools, perhaps to see how it does insight into the React component tree. And then as you can see, the acceptance criteria is that we need to add code so that QA automation engineers can run WebDriver methods that just do their polling loop, can't subscribe to events, that just check for a global JavaScript value to be true. And I would say, if they're checking, say, for a given URL to be loaded, like the homepage or a product page, then we should set that URL as loaded equals true somehow in that global context so that they can do that detection. And we can put the code right in the source or in a wrapper component that wraps around roots or something, and then put the entire implementation inside an if node env equals test clause, which will make it disappear in the production bundle. So if we do it right, then it's just like the React production node. It'll just, all of that code will go away when it hits prod. So this is, I think, a toughie. This is a framework level thing, but it is also really interesting work, and it's stuff that we need to prioritize, maybe not as high as some other things, but we need to get a concept started on this right away.
Yep.
Yeah, in addition, I just want to add something. Yeah, James, I'm discussing with you this problem, and as you know, I just see that we can test React components with Test Cafe, and we can just copy and paste some of these solutions, how we can detect these components inside our application.
Yes, that is part of the solution, and Test Cafe gave me some great insight into the type of API that would work. But as I recall, your Test Cafe implementations just have wait. You're waiting a given period of time before making the actual test selectors, right?
Of course, and React just render all application, and after that we can make some things. It's okay. Right.
Rather than waiting an arbitrary period of time, what we want to do is let WebDriver run its polling loop and execute JavaScript against run an expression of JavaScript that will return false until a given scenario is loaded, and then it will return true. And this has to work both for, say, SEO pages like product page where the page loads, but then an Apollo query loads, and then it refreshes again during loading, and then it refreshes again when the data is returned. At that point, there needs to be something which sets a global variable reflecting that the product detail page is really finished loading. Because I don't think that a test that simply waits a period of time is going to be a resilient test. If the server under test is slow for that test run, then the test will give you a false negative. If the server gets much faster, then the test will be unnecessarily slow. So we want to avoid waiting for hard-coded timeouts. And so this story is about setting variables so that the polling loop, which runs more than one time a second, can detect exactly when the UI scenario is loaded. Does that seem like it's a worthwhile effort, Vitali? I mean, timeouts might work for now, but it's a lot of technical debt.
I understand.
Cool. So, points? Or does anyone else have any other questions?
Yeah, I was just saying, is there anything we want to capture on that one, Mr. Zetlin, based on the discussion with Vitali, or you think it's sorted?
I mean, what I defined there is still pretty accurate. Maybe we might want to add a corollary that, well, I mean, I can add the corollary just that right now we can achieve partial success by setting timeouts, but that's a brittle approach. So I can go ahead and make that change.
Okay, easy enough. Thank you, sir. Any other questions or comments before we move to estimation on this one?
Hey, Eric, I have a question. This is Andrew. I'm not familiar at all with MFTF or anything like that. And James, you mentioned some end-to-end testing frameworks previously. Have we tried Cypress at all?
No, that one I had not checked out.
Okay, just throwing it out there as maybe related to this story might be helpful.
Cool. Well, the thing about it is, I mean, does Cypress run a headless browser?
Don't actually have a lot of information on it. I've just seen it a lot as a end-to-end framework recently, so maybe it's got some.
I'm checking it out. I'm checking it out now. That would be very cool. Time travel, real-time reloads, automatic waiting. Automatically adds waits for commands and assertions. Okay, that looks interesting. But the main thing is that we need to get to end-to-end testing in the most efficient way we can. The QA team is open to maybe changing frameworks, but MFTF is the easiest answer because the whole point of this end-to-end testing is to get to the Magento definition of quality, for which MFTF is the thing. The thing about it is MFTF happens to be written in PHP and the tests are written in XML, but the core problem is that it's a WebDriver and WebDrivers can't subscribe to DOM events. Just that's the thing.
Gotcha. Okay.
If Cypress can, that's fantastic. I don't know how it's doing it, but I'll check it out.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a good call out. There's a lot of buzz at Reacticon on that one. I too haven't had a chance to dig in, but yeah, to echo James's point, our goal here is really alignment with MFTF, and if there are ways for us to look at options that interoperate with that in a nice, clean way, then I think that's great. But we definitely need to stay focused on the standards here as much as we can.
Cool. Cypress is very interesting. I think that it's very promising. Our QA folks may need some time to do kind of research into it, but I'm going to add it. I'm going to mention it in the story.
Cool. All right. So just kind of finishing this one out, and so should we hazard an estimate on this one, Mr. Zetlin? What are your thoughts?
Given the fact that there's a number of different pieces of prior art to examine, there is some communication asynchronously with the test team, John Stennett, etc. to do. Well, actually, no, I don't think that second part is necessary. That's extra complication. Um, I mean, I think it's definitely a full sprint for someone. I'd call it an 8.
8. Again, these are ballpark, but any objections? All right. This one is groomed. We'll come back to this if we feel like it's any bigger. We certainly can convert it to an epic and then break off a couple discovery efforts as well. Yeah, the Cypress one's interesting. James, let's talk offline. We saw a kind of a quick demo of how Cypress is used against, I believe, an older build of Venya by one of the presenters at ReactAcon. Again, it was one of many frameworks that could be used to kind of evaluate things, and so it'd be us to look at this from an MFTF standpoint. But it was interesting. So, but again, not the experts here, and so yeah, we'll put that on the list of things to do. So, cool. All right. So let's switch gears then. So everybody's favorite topic is Venya here, and so let's switch gears a little bit. And so, as promised, one of the things we want to talk about is account. And so for those who are following the Venya experience as it's being built for the general availability this month, we've begun to dig into some authenticated experiences, right? And so part of that's of course, sign in, sign out, create accounts, some navigational elements relative to that, but there's not a standalone page yet for account details similar to what you would see today in Luma, right? And so in its earliest form, one of the things we'd like to do is similar to the spirit of ratings and similar to the spirit of wish list, as Salmia is really thinking about the UX for this, there are some basic things that we can call out in a discovery form, because ultimately, again, if you look at this example for Veronica Costello, it's pretty straightforward. So imagine a read-only scenario that would have the basics, right? Contact information, newsletters, yes or no, billing and shipping information, potentially recent orders that does get into what was just created for purchase history, but that's okay. And I think the starting place of this would just be address only. Recently ordered, same idea as purchase history, and then start to get into to wish lists as well, which is also being covered under a separate story. But again, the spirit of this is getting into similar what we've started to do, which is to kind of take with what we've got on the back end and start to expose pieces of this. All of this is available if you look into the details of Veronica Costello on the back end, and so the hope and the promise of the story is a little bit of discovery based on what's available, either GraphQL or REST. Be able to expose this in a way that is a standalone page versus a slider, and then look at a very primitive form of this, which just has to be read only. We'll worry about editing and other aspects of this later. But again, kind of putting this up on the board to say, okay, this, do we need to, create any subsequent GraphQL issues? Do we feel like we've got good coverage? What are the concerns here? Are they related or similar to other ones? How does this relate to wish lists, purchase history? And so there's definitely work here to get started ahead of where we're going to land with this month's MVP, really the Venya theme. And so here's the story. So in its basic form, as the shopper, you want to be able to view account details, including contact address, orders, and other related information. You guys saw the example from Luma. And the purpose here is to make an informed, accurate, or maybe even a repeat, if spelled correctly, purchase in the future. And so assumptions here are pretty straightforward. The idea here would be to take in consideration all the great authentication work that's been done, especially by Bargreen on the account piece, be able to, again, look at this just read only. I think we'll have follow-up stories to make changes to address and others, as you'd see in Venya. Don't worry about that for now. And then be able to focus on hopefully the easier parts of this, which are going to be the address and contact information first. Now, if we can pull in the orders and others, more power to us. We may have to, during this discovery, though, in an effort not to make this too big, call that out as separate work efforts. And so the tasks themselves, just like a lot of these, are just the discovery work on the coverage, especially if this would be done by someone less familiar. The discovery, the purchase history work, so the EPOM team has gotten that underway with purchase history. So taking a look at with what's been checked in for that as a PR, just to see how this might relate to the orders that you see here again in this guy right here. And so that would be a read-only variety of that. And then, of course, beginnings of a basic readout of account details. Again, Samia we'll work for magic and make this what I believe a lot more compelling than what we've got here for mobile. But the beginnings of this, the shell of this, is where we're going to start. So edit may be something a bit more in line versus what we've got currently, and change password will probably be a lot more elegant than a separate page. We want to take advantage of what we did for create accounts and those types of things, but none of those really need to be solved for in this discovery effort. We just want to be able to pull this in. So in theory, this could, the hopes is this could be very small, but actually, more importantly, let's make sure this isn't too big for us to start looking at for our next milestone just after GA, which we're kind of noting here as a release 5. So for those who are following, release 4 is the essentially where we're going to be intending to finish off at the end of the month with MVP. Release 5 gives us essentially another quarter or 90 days after that for this one. So that's what I've got. And so this is again the beginnings of where we would leave off with Luma, the presentation of it in a Venia form factor that at least plays off of the navigation we've got, and the identification of technical, but maybe even some experiential opportunities that we want to address in all of this. And it makes for a good ticket for someone who hasn't played around with us yet, or it makes for a great ticket for someone who might be able to quickly identify what's needed there, so that we can parallel path some of the UX work. So that's what we've got. So any questions or comments for this one?
No, sir.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and at least if we have no comments, let's hazard an estimate here. And so, where would we like to start the bidding on this one?
As a discovery, I think that it needs to be time boxed. So effectively what we're doing when we estimate this is not estimating how long it would take to finish discovery, but how much discovery to do. And I don't want one person to spend the whole time doing this. So I want to call it a 3. I want to say do those tasks in whatever detail allows you to do them in 3 to 5 days max.
Yep.
Right. We don't want it to turn into an 8 and show up with half of a my account page that's got a bunch of API calls. So
that's right.
That makes sense. I will update the assumption here after we finish the estimate. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Okay.
Anybody else? Anybody feel this is smaller or? All right. Let's call this one a 3 and give me a moment here to update the assumptions here. So. All right, there we go. Perfect. Done and done. Excellent. That's what we've got. So again, we've got. I think we've made good progress, and I think I've identified a really good update on tutorials. James, appreciate your help getting the MFTF work and kind of the story up there. I think looking for someone to help there, and then also the beginnings of some discovery work for account here, which may be a good good follow up to some of the create accounts work as well. And so, anything else that we'd like to groom as a team? These are the ones I prepared, but always open to at least starting something that we could always come back to, given the attendance that we have here. Any other questions, comments, or suggestions for another story?
So many that I don't want to take everyone's time up. So there's nothing beyond what's the most important right now.
Got it. No, that makes sense. So, well, good. Well, let's wrap things up here. Just a couple administrative notes. And so, as you guys know, we're definitely in the throes of the 2.3 release. And so, bear with us if it takes us a bit to get back to you. But also, for any outstanding pull requests or reviews and such, make sure you take a look at those. We're definitely counting on some of the work around Venia to push through. For what we're doing here, we've made a lot of really good progress, and for those following along, we definitely want to show that, and ultimately from our project that it was only intended to showcase product details and categories part of the GA. We've got a pretty compelling and basic commerce experience that we should all be pretty proud of. And so, if there's anything outstanding, definitely stay on top of that to the best you can. Again, bear with us if there's some questions that are outstanding. You'll see us dividing and conquering where we can on the Slack channels and such. But if there's anything immediate you know where to find us. And so please let us know. And then as we start to look at work post 2.3, don't be afraid to raise your hand. Let us know. And then we're also looking at other pockets of contribution, whether that be our community events and others, and then also building upon maybe some process improvements that'll happen as early as next month, moving towards weekly demos and things of that nature that kind of get us out of the cadence of sprints and such. And so look forward to all that. Again, that shouldn't surprise a lot of you guys, and actually I think should improve overall velocity and kind of the self-sufficiency of things. And so look forward to that here, after the Thanksgiving break. But as always, keep us honest on the on the feedback. Let us know if you have any questions, and by all means, thank you so much for your help and support. So with that, have a great rest of your day, and for those in later time zones, have a great weekend. Great.
Awesome.
See you,
Thank you so
everybody.
much, Eric.
Yep.
Thank you. Bye bye.